Hello everyone, my name is Maya. I am doing a British Academy postdoc at Oxford Brookes, and today I will talk about informal distribution in Bulgaria, informal film distribution in Bulgaria. So very briefly, I will give you some context for my project, my methodology, and my summary of collected data so far. Then I will provide an argument outline. I will talk a little bit about people's attitudes towards watching film in Bulgaria and why they might be switching to informal distribution, and then I will offer some questions for further analysis. Now, I would like to put a very big disclaimer over this. This is only the second year of my postdoc, and I have not finished the analysis, in particular the quantitative analysis of my data. So you will see a lot of rounding up in terms of percentages, and you will not see any standard deviation or complicated statistical things like that yet, but this is on the cards. So my project aims to investigate the habits and preferences of contemporary Bulgarian film viewers, their expectations of new Bulgarian cinema, and their ability to access audiovisual content through different channels. I argued that there has been lack of systematic academic research in the topic so far, with the exception of my colleague Alexander Donov's book on the performance of Bulgarian films in the box office, and my own post and my own PhD, and some data collection I've done for the Mercedes project. There isn't really a lot of audience work being done in Bulgaria. So what I am hoping for this project to achieve is to be the bridge or the dialogue between culture producers and culture gatekeepers on the one hand, and Bulgarian audiences on the other. My methodology, I employ a mixed model study where I do parallel qualitative and quantitative approaches across all the stages of the project. I subscribe under Schroeder et al.'s methodological pluralism and discursive realism, and I try to triangulate by using different sources, different theories, and different methods for data collection and analysis. My participants have been recruited through convenience sampling, meaning that even though I've done some targeted advertising to attract a heterogeneous group of participants, ultimately they are self-selected. So that has had an impact on the data, and I'll discuss that in a second. And the questions for my survey and for my focus groups were adapted from the UK Film Council Cultural Contribution of Film Questionnaire, the Mercedes Questionnaire, and the European Cinema Audiences Questionnaire. So these are the places where I've had at least one survey participant answer either online or a paper-based survey, which were the equivalent. And then out of those people, these are the places where I've had focus groups or individual interviews with the same questions. As you can see, the places with higher population density tend to have more participants and sort of more focus groups carried out there. I managed to get 580 valid responses on the survey and 86 respondents for focus groups and interviews. So as I said before, unfortunately my data slightly skews towards women, younger audiences, people with relatively higher education, or higher education exactly, people who are students or in higher managerial positions, largely urban audiences, mostly of Bulgarian ethnic origin, even though I did try to attract some of the minorities to the project, but again, that's a topic for a different presentation. They have self-assessed their IT skills quite highly. They have admitted to using the internet on a PC, laptop, or tablet at home, and they are mostly interested in arts, learning, and creativity as hobbies. For my focus group participants, similarly mostly women, mostly young, this time coming from medium-sized towns. And even though this this sample set is skewed, I would argue that it's still quite important for revealing some of the patterns and tendencies, because 90% of my participants answered that they're very interested in films and cinema. So what is my argument? Based on my sample data and on my preliminary analysis so far, I have uncovered that home viewing takes precedence in Bulgaria, and since the VOD market is quite underdeveloped, it is TV and informal distribution that actually take quite a lot of the share of how people watch films. Informal sharing seems to serve for accessing content that is not available either at the time or the place, sampling before purchase, thus minimizing the financial risk, substituting buying content because of financial difficulties or difficulties in access, which, as most of the scholars have explained, doesn't necessarily equal a ticket loss, because those people wouldn't necessarily be buying a cinema ticket otherwise, as well as diversity and ease of access, and providing film education, cultural addition, and engagement with different film cultures. Bulgaria's case is very much part of global issues surrounding the distribution model, current exclusivity of different film exhibition windows, and what I argue ultimately is that it's a bit more complicated than an anti-piracy campaign, which was launched by one of the big Bulgarian televisions in 2012, and features a really popular Bulgarian actor, and I will show you the clip now, so that you can see what pirates have been portrayed in the media as.
Cinema. Видели cinema. Повече от кино.
Ей, какво става? Кой си ти?
О, и какво стана?
Аз съм глътъчки. Ама какво?
Казвам, пригладнях нещо, видиш, защо ме дойде в толкова дневни. И как си свали новия ми филм безплатно?
Фейрплей. Така е честно. Кампания за фейрплей в интернет.
Само си помисли.
So it's very much equating intellectual property with actual physical goods and stealing and so on and so forth. So I actually asked my participants how often do they watch films on different platforms and through different channels, and the majority of them answered that they would watch films on TV daily, they would stream for free or torrent films weekly, they would go to the cinema monthly, and they would almost never use any of the paid video sharing platforms or the TV library pay-per-view catalog. This actually correlates quite well with the official statistics that we have on video on-demand penetration in Bulgaria, which is just over 7% in 2019, or that's about 500,000 people. And according to Statista, it's mostly people between the age of 25 and 34. Now, in comparison, some of the biggest torrent sharing websites seem to have quite a lot of traffic. So this is zelka.org, which used to be part of zamunda.net, and now they've separated for, undisclosed reasons. Together, they seem to have about 20 million monthly sessions. And there's a couple of video streaming websites, though to be honest, I must admit, I don't know which ones are the most popular free streaming video services, because there seems to be just so many, and I don't know which ones people use. But those two have about 6 million monthly sessions altogether. So how does this compare to the general situation worldwide? Well, it has been claimed that conservative estimates of movie downloading piracy are about a third of the global population, and in terms of video on demand penetration, that's just over 23% worldwide. So even though Bulgaria is a very different context from very well video on demand developed markets in the West, it's actually quite an important study for looking at the global picture of video on demand and piracy around the world. When it comes to Bulgarian film, also, unlike the clip that you just watched, or maybe as a result of the clip that you just watched, I don't know, it does not seem that Bulgarians want to necessarily download Bulgarian film off the internet for free, and most of them are either neutral or just happy to wait for it to be released on TV, to be broadcast on television. And I also asked them about 15 films from the last 10 years. Some of them are really big, large budget blockbuster films with a really big marketing budget. Some of them are smaller festival films, an animation, some independent genre films, a teenage comedy. I asked them whether they've seen them and what they've seen them on. And most of my participants seem to have heard of the films before, The really big Mission London blockbuster they've seen on TV, because it was a co-production with the TV channel. In fact, the TV channel that produced the anti-piracy campaign. And there was another genre film that was very often played before on TV, so they've seen that on TV. The smaller budget and festival titles they most likely hadn't heard of. The reason why people had heard of films but hadn't seen them could be access problems, or it could be a methodological issue. This questionnaire was ultimately quantitative, and they couldn't really discuss the quality of the films. So, as two respondents from the town of Sofia separately commented at the end of the questionnaire, they marked quite a few of the films as heard but not seen because they tried watching them, but they didn't really like them, so they never finished watching them, and for various reasons they were annoyed with acting or whatever. So it could be very much the result of that. So what does this mean, and why do people pirate? Now, we're not going to discover the hot water here, but I'm just going to give you some useful examples. The first one is accessing content that is not available. And historically, obviously Bulgaria was part of the Eastern Bloc. There was censorship on certain American products. Straight after 1989, the market shifted to an open market economy. And so this is when a respondent from Botograd remembers being a child, going with his parents to a flea market in a town nearby so they could buy some VHS cassettes of American action films. And he clearly remembers there were no original ones back in 91-92, so they bought the pirate ones and they really enjoyed them. So this sort of leads to Ezra and Rowden's argument about the influence of technology, be it VHS or digital, about disrupting borders and facilitating the transnational flow of content across borders. Similarly, nowadays, there's things that are simply just not available through formal channels of distribution. One of them, as a respondent from Houstondale says, is documentary cinema, which you have to watch on the internet or on TV. A respondent from Gabrovo complains that a film might play in cinemas for a couple of weeks, but then it's gone and you just can't find it, you can't access it. And another one from Stambuliski, which is quite a small town near Plovdiv, but not too close, says that it's very difficult for her to go to the cinema. There are no cinemas nearby, and she has to watch either online or on TV. So, in fact, in response to that last comment, I've prepared a few maps. The first one shows, as I said before, all the towns with one or more survey participants. The one next to it, out of those towns, shows where there are cinemas, at least one. And the one at the bottom shows where there are more than one cinemas. So this really shows the loss of exhibition network after the end of communism, and as you'll see in a second, the dominance of Hollywood as a major distributor in Bulgaria, who, well, as an entity which decides what is shown and what people have access to in those very few cinemas that are remaining. So informal distribution in this sense performs the function of gap filling where it solves the problems of the formal network, as Lobato and Thomas noticed. So the diversity of programming in cinemas as a result of Hollywood domination is quite low. As a respondent from the town of Stara Zagora says, it's exclusively blockbusters, as if in the summertime people go a bit dumb and they can't watch quality cinema. So when she does see that a new film is coming out, she wants to watch it, but it's not released in her hometown, it's only released in Sofia, the capital. She finds a way to watch it online, and she punishes the exhibitors for not giving her the choice. So here I asked, do you think that's why internet piracy is so prominent? And she said, yes, that and financial reasons, which I will address a bit later on. But just to really drive the point home here about diversity of programming, this is the programming in the town of Stara Zagora for the 20th of June this year. It is predominantly Hollywood, with a couple of co-productions, one with Russia, one with UK and Canada, but it's mostly Hollywood. And this is a town which has more than one cinema. It has two quite large multiplexes. So diversity of programming on TV is similarly problematic. I had a couple of respondents from the town of Sliven talk about how it's an occasion for celebration if there's a new film released that you can watch on TV. And one of them actually said the interval between when a film is released on the big screen and on TV is too long. I was like, wow, that's a profound observation, because people have been discussing this in the industry quite a lot. And then I had a focus group with a slightly older sample of the older generation. And I asked them, do you mostly watch films on TV, presupposing that they do? But one of them was very happy to say that if she can't find what she wants on TV, she will go online and download it or stream it and find a way to watch it. So this really brings us to the issue of distribution windows and the current exclusivity arrangements, as Lord David Putnam recently spoke about. He recommends a window of 30 days, hold back cinemas, and then films just becoming available on whatever platform people are happy with, because otherwise people will pirate films, and if they can't find them legally, they'll find them in an informal way. So diversity of programming on legal platforms was another issue, and I had a group of young respondents talk about this. They had access to Netflix, but they didn't necessarily watch Netflix, because they spoke about how difficult it is to find the things that they have had their siblings from the West recommend to them on Netflix in the catalogue. Which leads us to the digital single market, discussions about territoriality and financing national cinema, and how the principle of territoriality is actually going to remain in force, at least for now, with separate licensing for films on territory-by-territory basis. And it's the same as Netflix does with Hollywood. They decide which films they think that are going to be successful in a particular country, and that's where they license them for. Now, sampling is minimizing the risk of disappointment. I had two separate respondents talk about this, one in Sofia, one in Houston Dill. They said that they are happy to pay for films, or games in this case, which they know they'll enjoy, the ones that they've already seen and tried, but they didn't want to run the risk of wasting 5 or 10 lever on something that they wouldn't necessarily like or enjoy. So this brings us to the idea that in the digital world, consumers have the ability to be highly critical and selective of the content, appraising its value and choosing whether it's worth it. As Valentina Ray mentions, the formal distribution, the formal economy, doesn't really account for the positive functions that informality offers, like taste tasting, priming, and educating. So the financial side of things, similarly, I had a respondent from Schumann saying, if there is such a variety of channels to watch films, why is it still so incredibly expensive in the cinema? Why hasn't this been adjusted to attract people away from informal ways of watching films? And a respondent from the town of Kazanlak wondered whether it was the exhibitors actually trying to make more money. They didn't have any direct link to the higher ticket prices, so it was very difficult, he thought, for older people and for the younger generation to really go to the cinema and enjoy the experience because they didn't have the means. So most consumers do believe that artists should be adequately remunerated, but in the digital economy, they are doubting that they can justify the prices of the goods online, or in this case, in the cinema. And it is very much an issue of being a culture citizen, having access to those cultural goods, even if you come from a poor country like Bulgaria, which is still one of the poorest countries in the EU. It is about allowing people to be culture consumers and citizens of the world, even if through informal access. Now, ease of access, I had respondents who talked about how easy it is. You don't have to follow cinema programming, you don't have to schedule your time, and you can just watch at home. If you're emotional, you can just take a break, which brings us to the platform agnosticism that Chatrayan discussed some years ago, and the sense of being entitled to watch anything, anytime, anywhere, preferably for free, which has altered people's worldview and mentality. And finally, film education and cultural engagement. I had a respondent from Burgas who works in Sofia and is involved in the film industry, who has worked with children, and she was very disappointed to hear from them that they hadn't seen any Charlie Chaplin films, so she directed them to Zamunda to fill in their educational gaps. And another respondent from the town of Pleven, who spoke about just wanting to feel immersed in Louis de Funès films. So she found them on Zamunda, she watched them again, and they're obviously not in cinemas, and they probably played on some TV channels, but not all the time. So this is encouraging participation in the cultural life and personal development, stimulating creativity, and educating people, giving them access to different worldviews, different cultures, different cinematic content. Some preliminary conclusions I would like to draw. As Werner Herzog recently said, piracy has been the most successful form of distribution worldwide, and Bulgaria most certainly is a very appropriate case study for this comment that caused some controversy at the film festival. But also what Valentina Ray has very, very helpfully pointed out, it is the problems of cost and pricing adequacy, access to cultural production, and the business models that have really triggered the spread of informal distribution practices. And some questions for further stat analysis. I have my hypothesis about this from my qualitative analysis, but I want to see whether quant matches qual in the actual stat analysis of it. So does age influence informal sharing preferences? Are respondents from smaller towns with more difficult access to a cinema screen more likely to pirate? And what is the role of occupation as substitute for income in informal sharing practices? Thank you very much.